Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Zohair Abdul-Rahman, and I'm the author of the last paper that was sent out by Yaqeen on Islamic spirituality and mental health or mental well-being. So inshallah, this particular session is going to be a live session where I'm going to be able to discuss the paper and also answer any questions that you guys might have. And so I'm very excited to do this, and I just want to kind of start off by talking about the paper itself, but please feel free, for those of you who are coming on live, to ask any question and just drop a comment in the comment box. Inshallah, we'll be able to discuss that. If you have any insights or any reflections from the paper that made you kind of think and you want to share some ideas as well, that's a great avenue to do that as well. Please do comment, and of course as well share the broadcast as well, so those for the benefit of those who are not on the page, so inshallah we can have this video go forward. So I kind of want to start by just kind of talking about the purpose of this particular paper that I wrote, and talk a little bit about the paper for those of you who have not read the article yet. So the paper itself, the reason why I wrote it was because I really saw that there was a shift in terms of in psychology, particular positive psychology, where the West started to look at ancient Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Confucianism and Hinduism for insights into ways to enhance human life. And I thought that, subhanAllah, I mean, the ideas that they're extracting from these ancient spiritual traditions and kind of incorporating within their psychological framework, within their scientific framework, it's getting out to the masses, and that those messages are actually impacting people's lives, including Muslims as well. And many Muslims are also kind of turning to, the self-help genre, which a lot of their ideas stem from these kind of ancient Eastern traditions. And so I said, subhanAllah, I mean, Islam has such a rich spiritual tradition. I think that it's really vital that we explore it and we see particularly the utility of the Islamic message. And that's what I wanted to kind of hope to start that kind of conversation with this particular paper. For those of you who are coming on live now, Jazakallah khair. This is a live Q&A session, a discussion about the paper. So if you have any questions about the paper, feel free to put it in the comments. We received some questions from before as well, so I'll go through that. I just want to kind of give a brief overview of the paper first before kind of going into the questions. So the paper itself is broken down into two components. The first component is the general role of spirituality in mental health. And this is a new kind of understanding that the medical community, the clinical psychologists as well, have started to recognize that this dimension of the human being, the spiritual dimension of the human being, is so essential to optimal functioning and to mental well-being, that it's important to recognize its power and also to use it to enhance people's lives, to protect against mental illness, and also then to also treat a mental illness. So there's lots of different work that's going into being able to enhance spirituality and these types of things. And so that was the first part of the paper, kind of exploring those ideas in general. And then the second part of the paper is actually a specific dua that the Prophet ﷺ prescribed for people dealing with depression and anxiety. And this particular dua is then analyzed in this paper, kind of psycho-spiritual analyzed. So we kind of extract all the different themes from the dua and show how those themes or those spiritual states that the dua is meant to evoke can be protective and therapeutic as well. And so we go into a lot of detail into all the different aspects of the dua itself. We talk about the concept of submission. One of the parts that was really exciting for me when doing the research was the idea of submission. Because of course the dua starts, Allahumma inni abduk ibnu abdik, ibnu amatik, that I'm the, oh Allah, I'm your slave, I'm the son of your slave, son of your male slave, son of your female slave. And this idea of submission, there was actually a paper that was published by Andy Newberg, who is a medical radiologist, and he's actually started this new field called neurotheology, where he correlates, or he sees the effect of religious beliefs and practices on the brain. So he actually and this is in this is in my paper as well, and you can see his actual paper as well. But he actually does brain images and brain scans of people praying salah, and he compares khushu states with non-khushu states, and he shows the brain differences, the actual differences in the brain that occur when a person is praying salah with the idea of submission in their head, and all the different therapeutic benefits that come from that as well. So that's all in the paper, and we kind of go throughout the rest of the dua as well. I do encourage you to, inshallah, read that. It's available at yaqeeninstitute.org/publications. You can see the paper there. So let's get to the questions. Jazakallah khair for everyone coming on live. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to drop a line in the comments, and I'll do my best to get through all of them. So let me just scroll down here and get to the questions. So one question that was asked was in regards to in the paper, I talked about the difference between meaningfulness and the difference between happiness. And I talked about a study it was a cross-cultural study, actually. I think it included over like 100 countries, and it had like over 100,000 different participants in this study. And essentially what they found was that wealthier countries or wealthier nations had higher rates of happiness than poorer nations. And of course, that's kind of intuitive. You think, okay, of course, people who are dealing with poverty and things like that, it's harder for them to go through their life being in a state of happiness. But they also found in the same study that the rates of suicide was actually increased, or the rates of suicide were higher in wealthier countries compared to poorer countries. And this finding was very, very, very interesting, intriguing. And when you look further as well, so then we talked about, so just to have everyone's on the same page, we have happiness and suicide rates. Both of them are higher in wealthier countries compared to poorer countries. Now, when it comes to meaningfulness was actually lower in wealthier countries. They were of the lowest ranked in terms of all the countries that they studied. The wealthier nations, the rates of meaningfulness, or the self-reported rates of feeling that a person is living a life worth living and a meaningful life, was lower than those that were in poor countries. And so the authors interpreted the data to suggest that meaningfulness is actually the key concept in terms of predicting suicide rates and the idea of rating a person's quality of life and whether or not they feel their life is worth living. It's actually meaningfulness and not happiness. Now the question was, what do I mean by happiness? This seems a bit counterintuitive. How is it that a person that's happy is wanting to, end their life? And I think this is a beautiful question. So a couple of points to mention. Number one, about happiness in general. Happiness is a concept that's very difficult to understand because it means different things to different people. When people think about happiness, people think I'm trying to be happy. That's the point of my life. And the answer is really yes and no. So when we talk about happiness, the actual state itself, psychologically, the way that it's understood is actually happiness is a state of joy, or it's a temporal state of pleasure. That is what happiness is. It's a correlation to how much pleasure you are experiencing in your life. And so people who are experiencing pleasure are going to be happy. Okay, then that makes sense, and that's why people who are in wealthier countries report higher rates of happiness than people who are in poorer countries, because people in poorer countries are not necessarily enjoying pleasure in the sense of that physical kind of pleasure, being able to eat and luxurious foods and take in nice sights and have a stable financial stable situation and things like that. So that's happiness. Okay. Now the interesting thing about this is that the human being is designed, in this world at least, in this dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the human being in a state that we are not meant to just purely be in a state of happiness eternally in this world or for our whole life. In fact, that's actually something that will lead to, as we see here, higher suicide rates in some situations. That's for the akhirah. But the human being is actually designed in this world to live a life of meaning. Okay, to live a life of meaning and purpose, because human beings are goal-oriented. At every moment in time, we have to have something that we are aiming towards, and our actions are what propel us towards that end point that we're always constantly going towards. And everyone has experienced this, by the way. Everyone's experienced this, by the way. When a person is, at every point in time, for all of you that are on live right now, there's a certain point in your life that you're saying, I'm trying to reach at. So whether you're in university right now and you want to graduate university, whether you are in a professional school and you want to finish that and get a job, whether you're out of university and want to get a job, whether you are, a parent and your children are still young and you're saying, okay, I want to raise my children so that they become independent and stable and these types of things. Everyone has something they're aiming at. Once you get to the point where you've accomplished your goal, that's where all the pleasure and the happiness comes from. So happiness is there. Happiness, or the idea of being happy, is the idea that you are moving forward towards your particular goal or endpoint, what you want in the world. As you're moving forward in that particular direction, then you are kind of, the emotions are coming of happiness, and you're recognizing these positive emotional states that are coming in. So that's what's happening. If you get to that endpoint though, and you don't know where to go next, that's a state where then you're exploring. It's not possible. If you're in a state where you don't know where to go next, you don't have a purpose, you don't have a goal after that, you've accomplished everything you wanted to accomplish, once you get to that point, then the human mind is not able to cope with not having a meaningful life. They're not able to cope with the idea that there's no goal, there's no endpoint. I don't know where else I'm supposed to be going. And so suddenly, everything becomes relevant now. They're thinking, what am I supposed to do with everything? And that's low meaningfulness, because they don't recognize, well, what is the point of my existence? What is the reason why I'm here? Where am I headed towards, right? And so people in wealthier nations, because they're able to achieve this wealth and that's their idea, once they kind of get that, or if they don't get that, perhaps there's a barrier to that, then that end goal is kind of finished. And so, a person that, and you see that a lot, for example. I'll give an example, especially for those who are, medical school is a very difficult journey. And a lot of times it's very hard psychologically on a person that's trying to get there, because they've made their entire kind of life and their endpoint at that kind of success point. And so what happens is that those students are a lot more prone to issues of depression and anxiety if they fail a course, or if anything happens that hinders to that goal, to that end goal, where it's like, I can't do that anymore, then it's almost like their whole life collapses, because a person's conception of their life is based on where they think they're headed in life, where that end point is. That defines that personality, or that motivational state towards that end goal. And so when a person is not achieving that, or has achieved that, so that's two options there. Either you get to it or you don't get to it, then boom, everything crashes down, because there's no structure to the life anymore. So sorry, I went into a lot of detail and into a lot of tangents, but to just kind of put everything together, meaningfulness is much more important than happiness in terms of living a life worth living, in terms of seeing worth in your life. Because happiness is merely an indication of moving towards a certain goal. If there's no goal there, then everything falls apart. Then a person's in an existential crisis. They don't know where to go in life. And that's the idea when it comes to the idea of the meaningfulness versus happiness. Okay, let's go to some other questions. There was another question that was pointed here. So by the way, those of you who are just coming in live now, Jazakumullah khairan for coming in. If you have any questions, this is a place to discuss and talk about the paper, the Islamic Spirituality and Mental Well-Being. If you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to drop it in the comment box, and I'll get to the questions, inshallah. I'm just getting to questions that were asked before this live. So the second question that came up was a question about a comment I made about dua. So in dua, I mentioned in the paper that I actually present a case that dua should be seen, or some dua should be seen as from the lens of psychotherapy, rather than what conventionally people see dua as, which is just general prayer. And it's kind of been sometimes reduced to just like a wish list per se, like I want this, that, and this, that, and that's the limit of a person's relationship with dua, or the limit in which a person sees dua. But I present that perhaps we should see dua, at least a lot of the du'as in the Quran, more as psychotherapy, in the sense that, or not necessarily psychotherapy, but more as expressions of truth. Because classically as well, the scholars, they divide the du'as into two types. There's du'a al-mas'ala, or du'a al-talab, which is dua of asking for something specific. So like you're actually requesting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asking something. So in that call to Allah, you're asking for a particular thing, or you're asking for something from Allah. So that's the kind of the first category. The second category is dua al-ibadah, or dua al-thana, which is just the dua. It's called the dua of worship or the dua of praise. And what I like to conceptualize this as is the dua of expressing truth. And actually, when you look in the Quran, the majority of the du'as that you find on the tongues of the righteous and the prophets are not the first category, they're actually the second category. And particularly when people are going through like the hardest of trials and calamities, they actually, it's very surprising and it's interesting to notice that, for example, when Ayyub alayhi salam is being described as going through all of the calamities and trials and hardships that he's going through, his dua that's quoted in Surah Al-Anbiya, right at the end of Surah Al-Anbiya, Surah number 21, he doesn't actually ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for anything specific. He says, Allahumma inni massini ad-durr wa anta arhamar rahimin. That I've been touched with affliction and hardship, wa anta arhamar rahimin, and you are the most merciful of those who show mercy. And so, and that's the dua. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and so then we responded and we removed him from the gham. But you think, subhanAllah, he didn't ask for anything. It was an expression of truth. He stated his state, and then he just said, Anta arhamar rahimin. You are the most merciful of those who show mercy. Yunus alayhi salam in the same surah, after two more stories after, Yunus alayhi salam is described. He leaves his people before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave permission for him to leave his mission, because he felt that his people were a lost cause, nobody was accepting. He got very frustrated at them and felt that there's no point to this, and so he left the message. He left the mission, and then of course what happened was that he was thrown overboard from the ship in the darkness of the night, in the darkness of the ocean, in the waves upon waves of the ocean, and subhanallah, he was even eaten by he was put into the belly of the whale, and so in this time you think, okay, he's going to make dua, oh Allah, take me out, right? But he didn't ask for anything. His dua was the second type. It was dua al-ibadah, or an expression of truth. La ilaha illa ant, subhanak inni kuntu min al-zalimin. There's nothing worthy of worship except you. Glory be to you. I've been of the wrongdoers. So the question was, I just kind of gave the background. The question was, well, aren't they really asking for something because they're calling out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the relevant names to their particular need? And the answer is yes and no. No, they're not asking for anything particular. Like if you were to analyze that sentence, there is no, there is no asking of anything. Like there's no form, the form in which the dua takes, there is no asking of anything. But rather, it's merely just expressing truth. And yes, it is calling out to Allah by His names, but that's not asking Allah for anything. That is claiming and asserting the divine names and attributes of Allah. And the point that I mentioned what's the point of this? So what's the benefit of all that? Because that's really the point of going through hardships and calamities. The point of hardships and calamities is not just to escape them without transforming. The point of going through chaos, we're constantly on a cycle between order and chaos, or a good stable life, and then instability and everything crumbles around in hardship and calamity, and then back up. The point of going through that is not just arbitrarily just go in and come out. The point is transforming. The point is going in there and transforming. And that transformation can occur at many different levels. And one of the most important levels is that kind of cognitive transformation, or the transformation of the world around you, that you express truth and you recognize truth in that chaos, and that brings order to that chaos. Then you recognize the order in the chaos. You recognize what the point of that trial is. You recognize truths about Allah. You may have read about those truths in the Quran, but when you go through life, then you really learn about those truths. And so when Ayyub alayhi salam was touched with affliction, subhanAllah, think about this. I mean, disease and loss of all of his wealth, property, everything was lost. He lost his family as well. Everything was gone. He was isolated. And in that moment, what was the truth he expressed? This is so powerful. Anta arhamar rahimin. You are the most merciful of those who show mercy. You know, there are many people in the world, they go through difficult times and they lose this belief about Allah, that Allah has rahmah for everything. They often think, oh, subhanAllah, why am I going through this? And the pain is just too much for them to then still assert and believe that Allah is the most merciful. But Ayyub alayhi salam was the opposite. SubhanAllah, in his calamity, and that's the highest level of expression of that truth. If you can recognize in that state of chaos in your life, in that state of hardship, and that state of calamity, if you can recognize at that point that Allah is the most merciful of those who show mercy, then subhanAllah, that conviction is just going to be so strong and profound that Ayyub al-Salam recognized, despite everything I'm going through, I still know you are the most merciful of those who show mercy. So I recognize it. So what's that going to do to a person? He recognizes rahmah in this. Right? I still recognize all the other blessings that I have, despite the fact everything else is taken away. I still recognize you're still giving me rahmah at this point. I recognize that in this trial itself is a rahmah, because of course the sins are being purified. I'm being purified because pain purifies us. In this time of calamity as well, I recognize that you are still anta arhamar rahimin. I'm going to get out and I'm going to be better for it. That's the point there, right? And with Yunus alayhi salam, the idea here is that with Yunus alayhi salam, he is, and this is very interesting actually, for those of you who live by a coast and have gone into the ocean or just seen the vastness of the ocean, or have gone on a boat and the kind of, you're surrounded by just ocean and water. And if you've ever seen that, you just think, subhanAllah, like this scene, like you're just lost, right? You look around, there's nothing except water and you can't see anything in the horizon. There's just water and nothing else. And subhanAllah, that is the state of life for a person who doesn't have a relationship with Allah. They're living in this world as if they're in the middle of an ocean. Like there's no land, there's nothing that they can see that anchors them. They don't know which direction to go. Imagine if you're in the ocean, right? And someone just kind of spins you around and then boom, you went into the ocean and then you looked around. Which direction would you think you need to go? You don't know north from east or west or up from down or this or that, and you don't have any idea. Of course, take away the idea of the sun and whatnot and trying to figure out northeast. I'm saying just generally the ocean. You're just lost. There's no landmarks. There's nothing. And that's the idea of a life without a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the truth that Yunus alayhi salam recognized when he was thrown off the ship in the darkness of the night, in the middle of the ocean, in the belly of a whale. It was the most, he recognized that La ilaha illa ant. That was the truth. That was recognized. That there is chaos everywhere. And the idea is that, subhanAllah, life is just as pointless as this without a relationship with Allah. So he expressed that truth. He recognized that when he went through that, La ilaha illa anta subhanak, that there's nothing worthy of worship except you. The only reasonable way to live in this world is in a relationship with you. The only sane way that a person can to be in this world and to live and to get through the struggles is in a relationship with Allah. La ilaha illa ant subhanak. You are free from imperfection. And this is an interesting point here. Inni kuntu min ad-dhalimin. He went through the wrong and he recognized, you are free from imperfection. You don't go through the trials that I go through. You don't have to go through pain. You don't suffer. You are free of need. You are completely perfect. So in his imperfection and his imperfect state, he recognized the perfection of Allah. And then he recognized his particular imperfection. Inni kuntu min ad-dhalimin. And so, as you see, the prophets, and we follow their example, in their state of hardship and calamity, they would, in their du'as, would express truth to Allah. The truths that they recognized, the truths that they learned, and then once they made that call to Allah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered the plea, and they were removed from their affliction, because the point of the trial and the point of the test, they passed it. And once they passed it, then the purification occurred, the transformation occurred, that the truth that they were able to internalize and bring into the heart occurred, the light that came into the heart that made the world clearer, a better understanding of Allah, all that occurred. And so the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala removed them from that. And so a lot of times when people are going through, to kind of make it relevant to us, a lot of times when people are going through hardship and calamity, the first moment is, how do I get out of it? Rather than, what can I learn from it? Because anything we're going through in life, we have to recognize from the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And necessarily, Allah's will in this world is characterized by His rahmah, by His mercy, by His wisdom, His hikmah. And so, at every point in time, whatever's happening, there's a point to it. And I'm meant to grow and learn from it. So the first question that we should ask is, what can I learn from this? And then, how can I get out? Right? And usually you'll find that the point of it is that what you learn from it is your way out. What you learn from it becomes your way out. So that's, I guess, the answer to that question about the idea of dua, not asking for anything particular. Now, I should point out that this doesn't mean that you don't ask Allah to send me out. That's within the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That's not the point here to say, okay, don't make dua al-masala. That exists, and it's in the Quran. There are Quranic prescriptions for actually asking Allah for things like forgiveness and for lots of different things, and in the du'as of the Prophet ﷺ as well. In fact, in the dua that I analyze, that's in the paper, it's also the first part, the majority of the dua is just expressions of truth. And those expressions of truth, that's what we analyze and show how they can be protective and therapeutic in a person dealing with depression or anxiety. But then at the end, there's also a request, actually. There's actually a request for that. So there's both dimensions to it, right? The idea is both. And the best of du'as are those that combine both expressions of truth and then asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for something. And that, of course, is Surah Al-Fatiha has an excellent example of that. The first half is an expression of truth, and the second half is a request to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, so there is that. I'm going to now check out. So, by the way, for those of you who are going through who just came on live and are on live, you can ask any question in the discussion about the paper or about this topic in general or about anything that I mentioned here. So question here by Khan Sabzori. Can you elaborate on the concept of sabr as the ability to self-regulate? Jazakallah khair. Okay, so in the paper, I talk about the concept of sabr, and I describe it as self-regulation. So just kind of talk about self-regulation first, because I think that's the term that Muslim audiences are unfamiliar with rather than sabr. First of all, even sabr, I think that people have this conception that sabr is translated just purely as patience, but I don't think that that's a fully accurate translation or understanding of the idea. Of course, it includes patience, but it's more than just a passive state of just being patient at things that are coming. Sabr is a lot more of an active engagement. But so self-regulation is essentially the ability, the strength that a person has, the internal strength that a person has to withhold immediate gratification or particular desires and perform a behavior that is in line with their values or long-term benefit. So to put it in a nutshell, it is basically willpower. Self-regulation is willpower. It's the ability to withhold a certain inclination you have, so that strength to inhibit, and then to perform a behavior that is in line with your values, even though it might cost some energy, right? And generally energy can be costed in terms of actual physical energy, like using your muscles, it's too exertive, or mental energy, because it's like that willpower to get up and do something, right? Sometimes we have lower energy levels. So that's essentially what self-regulation is. It's a term that refers to willpower. And I think that's a better way of understanding sabr. Sabr is also really willpower. And actually, in the paper as well, I made allusion to this book as well. I have it here actually. It's a beautiful book by Ibn al-Qayyim. It's called Iddatu Sabirin wa Dakhiratu Shakirin. And this book is actually a book that's just purely on sabr and shukr. And he goes really in depth. This is a book by Ibn al-Qayyim, died 751 after the Hijrah. And it's a very beautiful book that goes deep into the idea of sabr. And I talk about in the article that the way that he describes sabr is really much about talking about this willpower. And he talks about sabr as essentially two different strengths. Actually, it's really interesting because I found that because I looked at the self-regulation literature, and people like Roy if you're interested on learning more about self-regulation in the literature, in the published literature, Roy Baumeister is probably the guy you want to look up, because he really kind of started talking about self-regulation and developing models and frames to understand it. But I looked at that literature, and then I read this book. Actually, this book contains a lot better insights, practically and even on a theoretical note, of an understanding of sabr. And subhanAllah, he talks about, he has his many different models to understand it. He even talks about it from a child development standpoint, so the stages of sabr, or the stages of the ability of self-regulation or willpower, based upon the stages of child development into adolescence. And then it's beautiful, subhanAllah, it's just beautiful. Like, Ibn al-Qayyim was just one of those geniuses that was he was an expert in so many different fields, and you can see that in psychology as well. He thought deeply about human nature, about human behavior, and you can see that in his works, reflected in his works. But I benefit a lot more in terms of understanding sabr and how it relates to our life in reading Ibn al-Qayyim's book. And by the way, so it's in Arabic, obviously, is always the best way to go because it's the original writing of the author. But this is actually translated fully into English. I believe I have that book, but I can't seem to spot it. But in any case, it's like excellence of patience and gratitude or something like that. You can search it. So it's available translation as well in English. I think it's published by Dar es-Salaam. But yeah, so Ibn al-Qayyim talks about sabr in terms of two different strengths, inhibitory strength and initiative strength. So the inhibitory strength is that willpower to disengage and not to act. So sometimes you want to do something, but you know in your best interest, in your value system, or based on your understanding of long-term benefit, it's better for me not to do that, right? Maybe I shouldn't have that extra piece of cake, for example, just as a small example, right? Or I shouldn't, on a serious note, then it's the idea of I need to abstain from that sin, even though I'm being drawn towards it, I need that willpower to take me away. So that's inhibitory strength. And then the other conceptualization, so there's two strengths that he talks about which fall under sabr. Then it's the initiative strength. That is the ability and that strength to actually engage in an action. Okay? And so the ability to actually act. And that strength that despite the fact that it might be difficult, it might pose challenges, physical exertion, mental exertion, spiritual exertion, all these different things, I'm still going to act. And so, for example, praying, again, the best example of that is Fajr Salah. Inshallah, all of you who woke up today for Fajr, that was that sabr in terms of actually doing an action that you're saying, okay, I need to get out of bed. I'm tired, but that's okay. I need to get out of bed and spray that water on me and pray Salah. That's the initiative strength, right? So there's these two strengths and capacities that fall under sabr. And it was so beautiful because this is such a useful way of looking at sabr, because Ibn al-Qayyim talks about, he says that, and people differ in terms of which one is stronger within the particular spiritual personality of a person, right? Because actually people have spiritual personalities. This is an interesting concept that you find actually in classical Islamic literature talking about spirituality, that this idea of spiritual personality, like Imam Malik rahimahullah was asked, why don't you ever go on any expeditions? You just sit here and like narrate hadith, right? And then Imam Malik, he responded, he said, the doors of actions and amal, of behaviors, of these spiritual actions, or these of spirituality, or of general doing good works, there are many of them, right? There's many paths towards goodness, right? And he says that it's just like the doors of rizq, right? And Allah opens some doors to others and doesn't open to others. It's like the same thing with actions. And so as for me, the door that has been opened for me is knowledge, right? That was his spiritual personality, right? That it was about the idea of the intellectual engagement in the deen and sharing that and memorizing hadith, and that was his spiritual engagement, that was his spiritual personality. For another person, that might not be their spiritual personality. For them, it's no, I need to do something. I need to interact with people and see the impact I'm making. I need to, go to a soup kitchen. I need to go to, feed the poor and things like that. That's my spiritual personality. Another person will say, no, I find very much solace in, just reading the Quran and the beauty in the recitation of the Quran. That's my, my thing, and that's what I focus on. And that's fine, right? A lot of times people feel bad because it's like, oh, I'm not doing this or that, or I should do this. I mean, obviously the goal of a Muslim is always to be balanced and to ensure, of course, there's always obligations and all aspects that need to be covered. But the idea of how do I keep growing, it's recognizing your spiritual personality and using that as your strength and saying, this is my avenue to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In any case, bringing it back to the idea of sabr, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he talks about how sabr is either initiative or inhibitory. So the idea, he says that, and people differ. So for some people, they have very strong inhibitory strength, right? That's part of their spiritual personality. That for them, they are very much able to just, if something's not good for them, they just won't do it. They're just very, very, very strong when it comes to that. If there's anything haram, they will not touch it. They're able to stay away from haram food, stay away from haram, looking at anything haram things, and that's easy. That's something they have that strength in them, right? But when it comes to initiative strength, it's a lot harder for them to actually do things. It's harder for them to pray salah perhaps, or to concentrate in salah, or to get up for fajr, or these types of things, right? And so that could be a state of a person. So they're very strong in inhibitory strength, but not as strong initiative strength. And then there's people who can be very strong initiative strength. They're driven. They'll pray qiyam. They will pray all the salawat and all the nafil and all the sunnah and everything. They'll be fasting on Mondays and Thursdays and the fast of Dawood, and that's just, they're go-getters, right? So that's some people. But then, on the flip side, it's very difficult for them to stay away from haram, right? They don't have the inhibitory strength as much. They fall a lot more into the haram. Okay, so people, and that's the whole thing, and people understand this intuitively, the idea that people have different struggles, and that's the point. That's how, and I think it's useful to see it in this way that Ibn al-Qayyim conceptualizes it, because now a person knows, okay, that's me, I get it. I need to focus on the inhibition. That's what I'm falling under, right? And Ibn al-Qayyim, of course, said that the optimal and the point that everyone should be focusing towards is where a person is best and strong in both, right? And that's the balance, of course, within Islam. So that's a beautiful concept that was described by Ibn al-Qayyim. I could talk about this book all day, but anyways, we'll end it there. So that's the idea of self-regulation and sabr, and people are starting to recognize the importance of self-regulation. Okay, and so in psychiatry literature and positive psychology and personality psychology as well, the idea of self-regulation is a predictor of a number of positive life outcomes and success in general. The ability of a person to self-regulate or to have that willpower, that's a very strong predictor of success. And actually in the paper we talked about some have conceptualized depression as a disorder in actual self-regulation, that they don't have. So essentially what that means is that there's a problem that's being confronted with people who are dealing with depression. They have a problem, and what's happened is that for whatever reason in the brain, imbalance of neurochemicals in the brain and biologically, it caused their energy levels to go down, and that does not allow them to have the strength for that doesn't allow them to have the strength for doing something to help solve their problem. So a lot of times when people say things like to people depressed, why don't you just fix this problem, right? And so when people are talking to people with depression, the first thing that they talk about is solutions, right? Oh, you should just do this, and then the problem will be solved. But that's not the point. The point is that energy levels are so low, they don't have the strength to perform that. They may know that, okay, I can do that, but the energy levels are just such a point. And subhanAllah, I really do recommend and encourage. There are a lot of things out there online and from Muslims as well who have shared their experiences dealing with depression. Read those because you gain an insight that you can't gain from reading books or anything like that. It's an insight into their mind that is, and some people have written very, very well on this. And they talk about the idea of just really feeling completely in the dark place, just chained. You cannot do anything. You can't seem to get out, and you can't just move on, right? And so that's the state. And so some people have said that this is a disorder in self-regulation. A person's not having that power or that energy to be able to deal with their particular hardship or calamity or problem at hand. They don't have the cognitive energy nor the physical energy to do that. Okay, so some going into questions here. Okay, question here by Erzakoi, can you talk about being suicidal? There's a lot of things that can be spoken about that, but I mean, at its root, a person who goes through suicidal ideation is essentially making an evaluative judgment about whether their life is worth living. Whether their life is worth living. And so when a person is dealing with suicidal ideation, the problem is that they don't see any worth in their life. Right? It's a problem in terms of self-worth. So they don't really see any worth in their life. They also don't see that there's any way out or any pathways for them to be able to be at a state where their life would be worth living, right? And so Muslims can deal with suicidal thoughts as well. And that's not something that, even though, of course, theoretically everyone recognizes, I mean, and this is the point, a lot of times people just say, well, your life is worth living because, it's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your purpose of life is to worship Allah, and so your life is worth living. But see, the problem is that that needs to be actualized in the person that's dealing with suicidal ideation, right? It can't just be there. The person needs to recognize their need for that and their recognition of worth and value in that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the beauty of that. And so that's why it's protective, by the way. These concepts we're talking about in spirituality is protective, because when a person constantly sees worth in their life in the framework of La ilaha illallah and the relationship with Allah, that can never be broken, right? When a person ties their worth in their life or the value in their life or the idea of why their life is worth living in terms of social relationships, and this is a big one, right? Because this is not an evil thing. It's not about, being materialistic. We're talking about social relationships, right? And sometimes there's extremes in everything, and sometimes people can tie up their sense of self-worth and esteem and their ideas and understanding of the world and their ability to be in the world and to cope in the world with their social circle, with their social relationships, right? And when a person does that, and possibly if they lose someone, that's when it becomes difficult, because it's literally a part of them. It's almost like a part of them has been ripped out with the death of that person or that person in their life. And so it becomes very difficult to deal with something like that, right? Or any other hardship or trial that kind of blocks them away from the end goal. We talked about this as well, the idea that every time human beings are constantly directed towards some particular goal. That's just the way we are wired. That's in our fitrah. You cannot be a human being and not be aimed at something. Otherwise, you won't be acting, right? The only reason you act in the world is to get from point A to point B, from here to there. And obviously, the implicit assumption is that there is better than here. And so it is not possible to live in this world without a value system and without an understanding of a goal or underlying purpose that you're living towards, right? The problem, of course, is that if a person sees so much barrier to that, and that is their ultimate, like, that's their ultimate purpose or ultimate goal, and there's just barrier to that, and it's been shattered, then at that point a person cannot process where they're heading in life. And that's the point where people get suicidal ideation, because it's like, there's nowhere for me to go, and so where do I go? And so that's one of the reasons that leads a person to this deep existential crisis. And so the idea is internalizing the reality that the ultimate end goal, or the ultimate place that we're heading towards, is Allah. And it's beautiful, the imagery of the Quran, right? It speaks so well to human psychology. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. That is the motto of the believer throughout their day. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Guide me on that path to you. Take me on that path to you. That is the path to Allah, right? And in that will be the positive emotions that we'll experience in that relationship towards Allah as we're going towards that journey. And there's nothing that can get away between you and Allah on that journey. Nothing anyone can do. And that's a beautiful reality that was captured by Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, who when a beautiful comment that he made when he was at a certain state in his life: what can my enemies do to me? If they banish me, it's hijrah to Allah. If they kill me, then I'm a shaheed fi sabilillah. And if they imprison me, then it's seclusion, khalwa with Allah. This is the reality that Ibn Taymiyyah is embodying in this short aphorism here, right? That relationship with Allah, no one can do anything to it. It's an internal paradise. It's a Jannah on earth that's within the heart that nobody can touch. And getting to that state is really important as a protective barrier towards getting to that point of suicidal ideation. And of course, people dealing with suicide needs to kind of be generally step by step to be able to actualize that. And actually, it's very fascinating. Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, in Ighathatul Lahfan, which is a book that he wrote, over 1,200 pages. And in this book, he essentially, it's a book about strategies of shaitan and being able to stay away from shaitan. But in the beginning of the book, the first about 150 pages is just about the nafs and the heart, actually. And it's really beautiful because one of the chapters, I believe it's chapter 5, is he talks about that the only way to achieve this tranquility or meaning in life, or this the sa'ada, or this happiness, not in the sense that we talked about earlier, but this kind of deep peace at the heart, the only way to live optimally in this world is a relationship with Allah. And then he goes through 10 particular perspectives of why that's the case. And he goes into detail, analyzing it from many different perspectives about why the only reasonable way and the only sane way that a person can keep their sanity really in this world and continue pushing through the struggles and the toil is in a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he goes through lots of different points, and obviously this is not the time for that. Perhaps that would be a really cool article for Yaqeen as well, to kind of go through those 10 points and perspectives that he mentions. But he goes through it a lot of the ways that I described it as well, in terms of understanding that the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our way out. That is our anchor to be able to get through the difficulties, and recognizing truth in our calamities and hardship, and depending on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and recognizing that this whole life is a journey towards Him, and constantly transforming ourselves to coming closer to Him, to learning more about His names and attributes by embodying them in this world. And that's the idea of embodying virtue, and coming closer to Him through spiritual acts, and of course intellectually growing as well, as we learn more about the world and learn more about Him, going on towards that path. Any other questions? Assalamu alaikum. Question from Umar Ali. Can you explain how to make dua where you can get the full spiritual connection, inshallah? To be honest, I haven't had a chance to read the article yet, but after this live Q&A, I will, inshallah. Shukran. Wa alaikum salam. So great question, Umar. How do you feel that full spiritual connection? So I think, obviously, I mean, this is like a whole topic in and of itself, the idea of being able to attain concentration at something. And I think a really cool way of understanding the idea of concentrating is that people think, I need to do something, I need to learn concentration, or I need to learn khushu'. I think that that's already something within us. We are able to focus. Like, people focus all the time on things, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be able to accomplish anything, right? People concentrate and focus on anything, whether that's a book that they're reading, a TV show, a video game, whatever it could be, work, studying. there's a certain time where you focus, right? That's the state that a person needs to be in. It's just focus of what's happening, right? And there's lots of ways to unleash that from within that innate kind of ability to focus that's already there. There's lots of different ways that a person can do that, but I'll just kind of share one way that I think is important, and it's kind of linked towards kind of the article as well, and that's when you make the dua, it's important to, number one, recognize that the point of the hardship is to grow, right? And the point of the hardship is what you're doing there. Like, you're fulfilling the point of the hardship by making dua to Allah and being in that state. And so it's about recognizing your state of need, or your state of faqr, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's state of ghina, His state of self-sufficiency. And so the state of self-sufficiency of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your state of complete need, that is what needs to be actualized. So you're essentially like, a beggar, like someone who is completely in a state of poverty before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and understanding that reality, then the emotions and the focus will naturally run out, because you're in that state of need and you recognize that He is the one that is the solution to all of your problems, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can bring you out of all of that. Then the focus will be there. Just like when a person is going into an interview, when they walk into that room, that they recognize that encounter, that interview is their ticket to their end goal in whatever career, whatever that particular goal is, right? And so that focus, that preparation, that's there. So that's the same thing. When a person is going through hardship, they need to recognize dua as almost that portal that a person enters in, that state that a person enters in, that if I do this properly, then I will be able to, if I do this properly, then I will be able to get out of my particular situation. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot more that can be said about that, but that's just one particular aspect I think that we can, inshallah, take benefit from. Okay, there's no more questions. There's one question here. What is the best MSA ever? I'll leave that there from Josh Buzzle. Obviously, I'm going to be biased. The university I went to, I think, would be the best MSA, McMaster MSA. But khair. From that, inshallah, we will conclude this live if there's no more questions. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone, for hopping on live and being here and having this discussion. It was something that was, I hope, beneficial. I definitely had some benefit in hearing your questions, really good questions that a person kind of really can take home and ponder about and think further about. So jazakumullah khairan, everyone. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.